Okay, so thank you all for coming for this journey in the story of the French clay group. I will skip a lot of, so it's what I would like it to be a journey in the French clay group. It's my view of it. It's very partial, very subjective, as you will see, but this is how I looked at it and wanted to give it back to you. So French, the initiation of the French clay group was initiated at about the same time the clay mineral group of the MINSOC Society was held in the very early 1947, and at that time the very first meeting of the French clay group des Argiles was held at about the same time. So all these societies actually began at roughly the same time. This is the very first issue. It's actually the clay mineral bulletin numero 0. It does exist. And it's available on the web, as you can see. So this was, at that time, the first meeting of the clay mineral group of the MINSOC was actually published as this numero 0 or volume 0 of the clay mineral bulletin. And this did not happen with the French clay group, which only came on a bit later. But the formal creation of the French clay group, and at that time it was what's called CNRS Commission. CNRS will be the large national center for scientific research in France that covers essentially all areas. And it was funded under the presidency of Professor Lanson, who actually was professor at the National History Museum. He was coming from mineralogy side, and we will see that. The first meeting, as we said before, were in 1947, as in the UK, as in Belgium. And this actually led to the creation slightly later on, but at roughly the same time, of the Comité International pour l'Étude des Argiles. That was the ancestor of the current IPRA, and that was created in 1948. And that the first president, and you can see that this is a bizarre acronym, French acronym, and this has been, to my knowledge, one of the very few French acronyms of international societies that remains even now. I mean, IPRA still stands for us as Association Internationale Pour l'Étude des Argiles, that nobody understands what it means. And just later, that's a creation of the clay mineral committee by NRC in the US, and the first meeting that actually led to CN. Kevin was just speaking about. Actually, Argiles was, and most of the first president and founders of the French clay group were actually coming from the mineralogy, and Jean Argiles, who was the first president, was fairly strongly involved in the French Mineralogical Society, was its secretary and then president twice, and he was followed later on by Alfred Lacroix, he was following actually Alfred Lacroix, who is at the order of the mineralogy chair of National History Museum. And he was at that time, he later became interested in opaque mineral and things like that, but at that time he was interested, and he did his doctoral thesis on phyllosilicate chemistry, and including especially the water as part of this structural composition. And he made a lot of work, especially on chlorite minerals, and finally led that to attempt of classification. But it also led to the first actual structural characterization of chlorite that was defined by Mauguin in 1913. This reference here, but this Mauguin was also, so you can recognize here what here, and the 14 angstrom spacing essentially. So you have it all, or most of it yet here. And this also, these chemical analysis also allowed Mauguin to determine at least partly the structure of micas, and that was published in 1927 with essentially all unit cell parameters. You can recognize these of muscovite here. that was published 3 years before Linus Pauling published his own version of the structure with much more details. So Jean Orcel was actually president of the commission until 1954, and until Jean Viard became president. And Jean Viard was also a crystallographer, and even at that time there was this creation of the French Clay Group Commission, and all this was a series of informal meetings. They were having this informal meeting every year, I think, or even twice a year. And in this, you can recognize some of these famous names that, or at least for the French people. Hénin was the first president of CIPEA, speaking, and you can recognize this one fairly easily. Also, Mehring was actually speaking about rheological properties of clay suspension at that time. So these are very current topics that were discussed 70 years ago. And all these, we've done actually the same thing as CMS has done for clays and seminovos. All has been digitized, and all this information is actually available for free. I apologize, most of that is in French, but there is some information, and I mean, it's not that difficult to translate anymore. And if you have any trouble with that, don't hesitate. I can probably translate a part of that also. After that, we will skip a few years and go to presidency of Jacques Mehring. And you probably know some of these famous papers, but the effect of random incertification, diffraction effect expected from random incertification, that was published fairly early. But he also set this basis for X-ray diffraction from random incertification, as I told you. And he also trained somebody called Rosalind Franklin, that as a radiocrystallographer. At that time, she was working on carbon, and later on, she worked on DNA structure, actually, and she was the one who actually allowed to reveal this crystalline structure of DNA. That did not get her the Nobel Prize because she died before that, and because there were 3 men to get this award. He was also, Jacques Mehring was also involved in a variety of very actual or very current studies using methods that small angle scattering, using hydration states, or using X-ray diffraction to look at hydration state for bionic samples, looking at the X-ray diffraction intercertification of extremely disordered samples, and not only from trying to extract as much information. And in my point of view, is was really doing his extremely pioneering work. Just to give an idea of the role of this French scientist, I mean, again, if you're looking at this meaning of this IPEA acronym, it's probably because it was recognized at the time the importance of the French people in this clay science world. And as again, at that time, when the CIPEA committee was created, that was the official history a while ago. That was published in 1974 in the IPEA newsletter, and at that time it was said that Professor Grimm was the first president. And finally, there was some discussion between Simon Caillère and the secretary at that time of the IPEA, who actually revealed that before Ralph Grimm, actually Stéphane Hénin was first elected as president of this Comité International Pour l'Étude des Argiles, and then Jean Orcel was. And this was acknowledged at that time by Mackenzie, and from IPEA secretary to Alain Suki, who was actually writing an obituary for Jean Orcel. French people were also fairly strongly involved in the nomenclature issues. We've seen the attempt for chloride nomenclature by Jean Orcel earlier on, and you can recognize here a few people. This picture was taken in the 1969 IPA meeting in Jerusalem. This was a meeting of the nomenclature committee with Chukroff, with Bruno, you can recognize, with George Walker here, with Barbara Neumann, if you have heard about Laponite, she's the mother of Laponite. And this is Pedro, George Pedro, who died 2 years ago, something like that. They produce also some reference textbooks in French, but I think some of them have been, so these two in French and this one in English now. And they were also involved fairly strongly in the creation of clay minerals as the Western Europe Clay Journal. And this happened, this decision was actually taken in 1972 at the International Clay Conference in Madrid. And at that meeting, there was a lot of people from all over Europe, clearly, but also a few representatives from France. And this is Georges Millot, this is Georges Pedro, and this is Raymond Bay from Mulhouse at that time. So this led to the actual creation of the Clay Mineral Journal that was proposed and in a meeting in Strasbourg at first, with clearly some reluctance from French scientists. And one of their main claim was that the Clay Mineral Journal would be published in English, mainly. It was possible, but they were kind of wishing that it could be something else, maybe French, for example. But I think it was a good decision, to be honest. And that was the last issue in 1995 of the Bulletin du Groupe Français des Argiles, which is dead. And at that time, it was replaced, obviously, by Clay Minerals. As I said before, all articles published in the French Clay Group Bulletin may be retrieved, including some of them authored by Bruno and many other well-known scientists like Mackenzie and people like that. And actually, Bruno wrote a letter to Hélène Paquet and to Georges Pedro at the time, saying that he would like very much to get the comprehensive index of the French Clay Group Bulletin. And now this is available not only as an index, but also the full text is now available. It took us only 45 years. We're a bit slow sometimes. And with this, I will thank you very much.